Welcome back.
Hey guys, it's Jake,
And I'm Cam.
and we've got issues. Quite a few issues actually today. Today we're going to talk about Ghost in the Shell.
All right, so Ghost in the Shell. We've actually been planning to do this review for a while, but I think I mentioned, or we both mentioned in the last video, that we've been caught up with a lot of life admin, so we just haven't had time. But we did both read or reread the manga in preparation for this video. So, what do you want to start with, Jake?
Let's start with the overview for Ghost in the Shell, or well, yeah, just an overview of Ghost in the Shell. How's that?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. So the original manga was written by Masamune Shiro,
Hmm.
and it basically, I mean, it was written between 1989 and the sort of early 90s. I think it completed in 1991,
Hmm.
and it follows the sort of the adventures of a sort of a cyber terrorist or counter cyber terrorist organization called Public Security Section 9, and they're led by their major, who is Makoto Kusanagi. And there are basically what follows is a cyberpunk in the very, I suppose, traditional 90s essence of the word. If you're familiar with Akira, and sort of Pat Labor and a lot of these other sort of early science fiction series from Japan, it's similar. It comes within that category of cyberpunk, I would say. Um, so really, the impetus behind the story is these this particular manga is really Shirao's thoughts on design, philosophy, a lot of sociological issues around politics, and really predominantly it focuses on um, the consequences of technological advances and how that affects the nature of consciousness, and also what it means to be a human being, what it means to have a soul. The
Hmm.
very title "Ghost in the Shell" is related to the ghost being, if you like, the personality, the persona, the soul, that is encased in a body. And now, in this case, most of the principal characters are cyborgs. They're cybernetic sort of characters, and the idea of having a soul is somewhat muddied, and that's what the story sort of looks in, sort of explores, if you like. So, Jake, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure, sure. I mean, for let's take out the volumes that we do have, Cam, if you have it handy.
I've read it. I've read it digitally.
Okay, okay, got it.
Hmm.
I have got the original volumes when they came out for
Hmm.
Dark Horse Comics back in
Yeah.
1995. And as you said, the
Yeah.
original run was done by Kodansha in Japan.
Yeah.
Um, and that was back in the late 80s and early 90s. And so this came out in a limited series here in the States. Let me show you here. And they came in gorgeous covers. This is kind of like out of order here. Right. This is an 8-issue limited series, and I'm just showing you some of the covers here.
Really
Right.
nice.
Of yeah,
Yeah.
Motoko Kusanagi is there prominently on the cover with either a Fuchikoma or um one of the vehicles called Fuchikoma, the
Yeah. The
spider vehicles that they
spider
ride.
tanks. Yeah.
Yeah. And these are gorgeous, and really, really glad that I got them back in the 90s. This is actually, as a bit of a personal addendum to this, I got this in 1995 when they first came out, and that was before I went to Japan first in 1998. So this was one of those things that was coloring my perception of manga and Japanese culture before I even went to Japan, and what really was the impetus for me to go to Japan.
Really,
Um,
this is one of the manga that got you to move out there.
oh yeah, yeah. This
Oh.
Akira, especially, like
Hmm.
It used to be like people won't believe it now, but back in the 80s and 90s and even in the 70s, like anime and manga, especially manga, wasn't really very well known
Yeah.
except for the licensed serialized versions of Robotech and certain pieces of
Yeah.
anime like Tranzor Z in the United States or Mazinger Z
Mm,
um
yeah.
from
Or Voltron as well, right?
yes, and Voltron, the different iterations of Voltron. And of course, it's certainly spread a lot, but back then when you were even back when I was in high school, I was in a fledgling anime and manga club, and most of the stuff that we got was just video cassettes, like pirated video cassettes
Yeah.
that we made for each other of things that we
Yeah.
just could just scrounge around, and it was just like,
Oh man.
oh, what do you
Yeah.
happen to have? Oh, okay. Oh, well,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
happen to
Yeah.
have this. you know.
Like now that you've broached the topic, I have a really good story. I remember back in the sort of I want to say the late 90s, I used to email. This is when emails were quite new. Um, I used to email through forums and whatnot, people who would burn uh, discs for me of subtitled, unlicensed anime. So a
Hmm.
lot of the shows, I didn't do this when this was a something done at comic conventions, which I've heard people tell stories about. But I got a taste of that kind of almost underground anime scene that nobody, anime hadn't really hit the mainstream back then,
Hmm.
and certainly not when I was first, when I saw Ghost in the Shell, which was the movie rendition, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that was back in the sort of, I want to say, '95 when I saw that film. So
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, we've come a long way. We've
Yeah.
as a Western
When you have
audience, right?
yeah when you have pretty much, man, I saw that Pokemon was being sold at an Academy sporting goods store. At a sporting goods store,
I know, right?
Pokemon
Yeah,
cards were
yeah.
being sold. I was just like,
Mm,
wow, this is just fantastic the way it's come.
yeah,
But
yeah.
now, really, it's of course mainstream, and we are flooded with so much material. But
Mm,
you could imagine back then in the 90s,
yeah.
especially when it was just starting to become uh, part of the mainstream, that you were already in the know when you were part of those groups. You were just like, oh yeah, I know that's coming out here. I'm so stoked for the translation, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, I'm glad you showed those front covers as well because I recall. Do you remember I was talking about a comic store that I used to go to in London when I was at university?
Hmm.
Um, it was Embarking, and those guys there, they used to stock a lot of these single issues from Dark Horse, and man, I was a fool. I didn't buy them back then, but because I've nowadays they I think they're all collected by because the license has been re-bought by or I suppose reacquired by Kodansha. So
Hmm.
so now the collected editions are released by Kodansha, but these Dark Horse versions, which I might add, the original, the second edition of the collected Ghost in the Shell was uncensored. Every other version of printed version in English, and I believe in Japanese as well, of the series has been censored. So there's a lot of explicit sexual content that's been removed. And I'm usually against this because I absolutely I can't stand censorship. But Masamune actually he was the one who decided to remove those panels, um, which is I mean I can kind of see why because there's so much nudity in it. And there'd probably be teenage boys reading this. But then again, I suppose that's why he drew it in the first place. But
Well, I mean,
uh,
Shiro himself is an accomplished erotic manga artist.
oh yeah,
Because
yeah,
because in Japan you don't really, if you do, like, I mean, look at each one of these covers is of course
yeah,
slightly, glorifying
Sex-
major
sexualized,
major
yeah,
Kusanagi here. So
Yeah.
So it's really one of those
Mm.
it's really one of those things where in okay, you have to kind of see what the sensitivity is of the culture you're releasing
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
material for. And this version is censored and redrawn. Um
Oh, okay.
yeah, the original release of Ghost in the Shell as a manga, this one is censored and
Mm.
not at all as explicit as the one that you would find in this one. This is the
Yeah.
Kodansha release in
Yeah.
Japanese, and
So does that have? We'll get into it when we look at the writing and the art. But does this have the scenes I'm talking about?
oh yeah, this one does. I picked this up in
Yeah.
when I was in Japan the first time in 1998, and I was
Okay.
just really chuffed that I was able to pick this version up. And when I opened it
Yeah.
up, I was like, I don't remember that being in there.
Yeah.
You know, I was like,
So, yeah.
whoa,
That's
yeah.
really cool because I've read the Dark Horse second edition, which is basically that translation with the um, material that was edited out later in later editions. So I've read I've actually seen those explicit scenes as they were dubbed. But one other thing I'd like to set straight because I forgot about it while explaining the intro is that um, the series was originally serialized in Kodansha's seinen magazine or seinen manga magazine. It was called Young Magazine Zokan Kazokuban from 1989 to 1990. So yeah, but yeah, I mean it was released in various Tankaban versions. One of which you have, which is a complete collected edition. Um, but of course, it doesn't end there. Ghost in the Shell. Masamune Shiro expanded on the universe that he created there, but it wasn't. And I think maybe we can get into this. It wasn't until the animated version, which was quite famously directed by Mamoru Oshii, who has done a lot of a lot of movies, anime movies, as well as live action films in the Japanese film industry. He's quite a well known name, and I mean this film when this film came out in the 90s, it like Akira, the animated adaptation of Akira, it changed I suppose our perceptions of what anime was. It was one of those, if you like, the OGs, the ones that set the bar, if you like,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
of what anime is. And also, it was probably the first introduction to many of us to anime. Um, I had no idea when I saw this in '95. I remember renting it from I guess our equivalent of a Blockbusters at the time. Not Blockbusters, but just a no-name video rental place. And that film, is that what version is that you've got in front of us?
oh, this is the actual analysis of the film. This I got
Of the
in Japan
movie.
as well.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay,
and
cool.
yeah, to segue right into what you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
I picked this up as well, and this is a pretty freaking awesome book, which of course is all in Japanese and
Yeah.
details all the different things that went into the movie, including the designs for the weapons and the characters and such.
Yeah.
And of course, here's a little bit of a movie synopses and such.
Mm. Nice. Nice. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I watched it soon after it came out. And I was blown away. I was totally blown away by it. It's a very different having now the funny thing is I saw the movie when it was relatively new. It was maybe a year old, so it came out I think it came out in '94 in Japan and '95 in the West, in America and the UK. But oh, that's really cool. Yeah, all the design sketches, concept art. But I didn't know it was based on a manga, and it was only maybe 20 years later that I was interested. I knew beyond that point that there was the original manga because I knew about Appleseed. It wasn't until much later that I found out that the movie was based on the manga. And the funny thing is, and I want to get into this topic sort of within this video, is that there's a very big distinction between the style of the film and the original manga, right?
Yeah. And we'll get a little bit into it, but maybe we should go into the story first and
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the writing.
Yeah.
And
So why don't you start us off
go
on
from
the
there.
cool? So why don't you start us off with the writing then, and the basic
Okay.
story?
So what's really cool is here I'll replace this with this back to the original Japanese one. And how should I start? Really, this is written and drawn by Shiro Masamune, and this is not his first work. Like, this is actually kind of like his work in its maturity, I think. Like when it kind of first fully bloomed, because this is building on concepts that were first really introduced in some of his earlier works, like Black Magic 66 and Appleseed. Hopefully we'll be able to introduce or talk about those later. And you had mentioned Appleseed before, which also begat its own anime and different media from it. But Ghost in the Shell is really one of those things that's the most represented mainstream, because it was made, of course, into a movie with into a Western movie with Scarlett Johansson. Well, anyway, you had touched upon it in the intro when you said, yeah, this is work that's espousing how technology affects human civilization, really, and how possibly in the near future, how things like being able to access your own ghost or soul, and being able to do stuff with it will radically affect society and ethics as a whole. So the thing is, this is a thick book. Even in the Japanese collected edition of all of those issues, there's a lot of things that are being talked about. And I just wanted to kind of go through some specific things that I found intriguing and possibly prescient to the things that are happening right now. For example, the use of robots, the use of AI, and of course how our own consciousness can be accessed and in this case duplicated to go into different possibilities for human beings. Yeah, I mean, even now I'm kind of starting to get lost with what I want to talk about, because there's so much to talk about. You know, maybe just go into some parts of the book and say like, well, this is really intriguing, because I thought that you wouldn't think that these issues had been introduced in the late 80s and early 90s. Yeah. But actually, like, a lot of that is developing now, especially with this hot topic of artificial intelligence. I mean, this stuff has been broached here.
Yeah.
And really, they tried to Shiro tried to expand on the subject and say like, well, what is technology really leading us to?
Yeah,
right.
I totally agree with you. It was way ahead of its time. The fact that it was there are stories in there that relate to AI going rogue, and all of these ideas that are genuine concerns today. See, I can give you a perfect example. I mean, I work at a university, and we had a presentation earlier this week about how AI is affecting the way that academics mark papers today. On academic courses, because so many AI trained software services are getting to the point where university traditional systems that can identify plagiarism and incorrect referencing, these systems are bypassing those fail safes. So we've now come to a point where we have to have these discussions, and this is what, some 20 plus years after, 30 years after Ghost in the Shell. So
Right, right.
it's crazy that he was so far ahead of the curve in terms of the concepts. I have some grievances with the writing, but maybe
Hmm.
you can start off talking about what you thought of the actual stories themselves. Concepts,
Well,
mind blowing
uh-huh.
though.
Yeah, yeah. The overarching, let's go into the overarching plot line, which is essentially like um the idea of a sentience kind of wreaking havoc through the storyline, and the major and her team, Major Kusanagi and her team,
Yeah.
try to kind of plot or trying to track down what's happening, what's causing all these disruptions.
Mm.
And it leads to the discovery of the puppet master and the conclusion of the story of this first
Yeah.
volume of the story. um
Hmm.
which actually, if you really, since you talked about the film is actually, even though it has a very different feel,
Yeah.
it captures the theme of the original work quite well, um
Yeah.
and asks those same philosophical questions very well.
Mm.
And even
Yeah.
uh, some parts of this original story have been mirrored in those parts of the film, because those are the
Mm.
things that really resonate. Um,
Yeah.
but go ahead with
Well,
your
I mean, I
thoughts.
would probably have something controversial to say to all the manga snobs out there, um, and that is, I think I prefer the movie in its more focused angle towards the Puppet Master storyline, because the book is quite fragmented in comparison. In that, I mean, feel free to jump in regarding this, but there are a lot of different sort of vignettes almost that have a very sort of a very loose connection to the main storyline, which is the Puppet Master story, whereby a basically a rogue AI, um, or what we could have been a real person, um, was able to basically take over other cyborgs, basically other cybernetic organisms, and
Hmm.
because of it, the Kusanagi and her team are trying to track down who this person is. Now the movie is the same story, but it doesn't really take into consideration the sort of more slice of life elements that are written into the manga original source material, whereby
Hmm.
we sometimes see what the team gets up to outside of the missions. We find out a little bit more about the backstory of the world. There's a bit more world building, and that part I appreciate, and I really enjoyed. What I perhaps could have done without are some of the thematic discrepancies. So on the one hand, there are some really heavy-handed sort of science fiction stroke sociological issues that are very well presented in the story, and I'm talking about the manga. Whereas they're juxtaposed with almost oddly out of place comical elements as well. That well, remind me what the name of the spider tanks are.
The
Fuchikomas.
Fuchikomas, yeah. Hmm.
So the Fuchikomas are really funny, and they are sort of, if you like, a little bit of a palate cleanser from all the heavy-handed sci-fi. But
Hmm.
at the same time, sometimes the humor, and I don't know whether this is um, sort of Shiro Sensei's sort of sense of humor, but or his style, but because I haven't read any of his other manga. Um,
Hmm.
but it just kind of feels a bit out of place, like it's a bit jarring to me anyway. But how do you feel about it?
I think actually that the first off, that the film and the film and the comic book have to be accepted on their own merits. It's like
Yeah.
the film is a great adaptation of the themes of the serious themes of the comic book, and you're right to kind of say like, yeah, and possibly it colors your perception because you had seen the film before, and now
Yeah.
when you read the comic, you kind of go like, oh wait, I didn't realize that there were these other elements in it.
Mm-hmm.
But the comic book, of course, just continues, and it's the blossoming of Shiro Sensei's sense of storytelling, which has to include a sense of humor. I think, especially with the way that he wants to portray the characters as human themselves, including even the little spider tanks.
Yeah.
Gives the balance to the storyline, wherein I think he was intentionally trying not to be so grave as to the ideas he was presenting, because these are really, let me say it this way. In most of his really expansive works like Appleseed and Ghost in the Shell especially, he makes it a point to kind of say like, well, this is how society would be affected or run if technology was at this certain point of development, you know.
Yeah.
And he poses us with ethical questions, with really ethical questions, you know. Case in point, that is mirrored in both manga and film when someone is manipulated by manipulating his memories. I'm talking about the garbage truck driver that was manipulated in order for him to be a pawn, essentially. And it's one of those things wherein he was given a simulated family.
Yeah.
And in this version, in both versions, you kind of see the pathos. He's like, how the big question for this poor human being who's been victimized, he's basically been pretty much mind raped. You know, when you implant the memory of a mother and a daughter into your head, how do you get rid of those memories? And in the comic version, there is no resolution. In both versions, there is no resolution. But in the comic version, at least, there's a little take of the garbage man that says, oh yeah, forget about it, you know, just forget about it. But in the movie, there's more pathos, because he's like, how am I ever going to get rid of this, of these memories? And so it even gets into the specific well, that's what's intriguing is it gets into the idea of memories being kind of like part of your identity, and a person's, you actually, your character and personality is then disseminated through other people's memories of you, which is really a rather intriguing and awesome concept, which a lot of media even takes as its own, or has been part of culture. It's like there's some ideas out there culturally wherein a lot of it is like ancestor worship, or, you know, the idea of commemorating your ancestors and saying like, paying respects to them, because if you don't pay respects to them, then they kind of cease to exist. And how is it that your character or your being continues to exist? Those are the really deep things that, going back to the original question, is Shiro's kind of sense of humor tries to balance in the actual storyline. And there's really some really great things here for avid Shiro fans, because you would think that his work isn't a continuity of the other work, but I was even when I reread this, I totally got a giggle and a laugh, because there's a guest appearance by Anna and Unipuma from Dominion Tank Police.
And also,
and that's a screwball comedy. That's a
Yeah,
screwball
exactly.
comedy. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And what I wanted to say about Dominion is that with Dominion there was you can see where a lot of the humor in Ghost in the Shell comes from, and it is literally that. It is there might be, I haven't read Appleseed, so I can't really say, but there's a lot of this kind of slapstick humor and um, almost I want to say childish in a lot of way. Some of
Yeah.
the humor, but especially with the Fujikomas, which by the way I did laugh at some of the gags. Especially there's this one little mini this one mini story where it's about what the Fujikomas do kind of in their free time, and how they work so hard for everybody, but they're literally, they do a thankless job really. And it's kind of how funny how Bato is sort of on the one hand is sort of oblivious to how their world is sort of revolves around him and around missions, but yet they've got lives of their own in a way,
Yeah.
as ridiculous as it sounds. And it's funny, and I appreciate it. I welcome it. Um, I think what I'm getting at is that when some of the more heavier elements or heavier moments in the story materialize, I feel some of the I suppose the humor doesn't quite work for me. It doesn't feel like it has a place there. It does in certain parts, it doesn't in other bits. But I think maybe
Hmm.
because the movie was such a streamlined version of that one main storyline in the book,
Hmm.
and again, I guess this is very indicative of Mamoru Oshii's directional style, but it is quite, um, I want to say, sterile. And I don't mean that in a bad sense. I just mean that the world he crafts, which is obviously based off of Shiro's world, is is even more sterilized, if you like. All those elements of humor and the silliness is just gone. It's just literally
Yeah.
everyone's dead serious, and the story is just the stakes are high, and there's no room for humor, right?
No, I mean, but that's his. I think that's his. Well, I mean, it runs through Oshi's work, but then we'd have to go
Yeah,
through Oshi's
yeah,
work,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
so yeah, you get to see how the melange of Shiro's world building and Oshi's kind of philosophy of filmmaking,
Mm,
uh, kind of kind of coincides or collides in a way. Um, I, for one, when you see other works, other media based on Ghost in the Shell, you'll see the humor there, like the some of the
yeah.
limited anime series that have come out will showcase
Standalone
some of the actual,
complex, right?
yeah, like standalone conflicts will have a little bit more humor into it,
Yeah.
which I really appreciated.
Mm,
I think I can't really separate. You can't really separate Shiro's work with his humor, and you can also see if you know a little bit of his history of working, the layouts when we get, and this is a good segue probably into the art of um, Ghost in the Shell and Shiro's artwork as a whole, is Shiro was actually influenced by girls manga, and it was his reading of Ribbon, which was a popular girls manga, that influenced his layout style and the way that he actually kind of puts his ideas on the page. And you could even see it in his stylization uh of women and girls,
mm.
because a lot of that is actually very stylized considering um girls manga style. You,
Yeah.
you if you there's a different style for girls manga, if our viewers are kind of
Mm.
wondering,
Yeah.
especially back in the 80s and 90s. And I actually have a coincidentally I'm gonna get uh a piece from my bookshelf here of 80s manga, 80s girl manga, and this is an issue of Margaret, and this I love this. This is really one of those things, one of my first original artifacts from Japan from the mid
Mm.
80s, given to me by a friend of the family. She married a Japanese person, and when she
Mm.
went to Japan, she had a whole. She just went to a newsstand, bought a whole bunch of manga, put them in her
Yeah.
suitcase, and gave them to me in the United States. And boy, did
Yeah.
it really open my eyes, because
Yeah.
when you look here, um, you can already tell the thematic differences and in the stylistic differences, even in the layout of girls manga. And
And
so,
for anyone who is wondering, girls manga is shoujo.
and here you are, it's really, it focuses very much on dialogue and the story, right, and the relationship between characters. So I think even Shiro's way of storytelling and a bit of his sense of humor
Yeah.
come from this kind of playfulness of layout and of dialogue and of character building.
Interesting. Last point about the writing, though. How did you feel about the more explicit content in there? So, there's a particular scene that many people may not know about, where there's a simulated, if you like, orgy that the major sort of partakes in, um, and it's quite interesting because on the one hand it is massively sexualized. It is literally just it's softcore porn really at this point. It's maybe hentai, but at the same time there is a story element related to it, and
Yeah,
I
there is a
wanted
story
to
element. Yeah.
yeah, and I wanted to get your sort of opinion on it. So for me, the fact that so to give context here, Bato is on a mission, and because he is through the net, has a link between himself and Kusanagi. He's able to feel some of the feelings that she is feeling, and so when she's having this experience, this very sexual experience, it's basically an orgy. Um, he he doesn't realize it, but he's experiencing it vicariously through her and or subconsciously through her, and he has no idea. He feels completely out of place. He's completely out of his comfort zone, and he doesn't know what the heck is going on. And it's really funny. That's one of those moments where I found sort of his sense of humor really gel well with the storytelling and the world building. I thought it actually made it put a smile on my face. However, I will also say though that I don't think we necessarily needed to see um, the kind of explicit content used to drive home that idea. I think it could have been done in more tasteful ways, but that's my opinion. I mean, what do you think?
I don't know. I'm kind of wondering how this was presented in its original form, if that was actually even published. In which case, depending on the audience who's like reading this, I don't know if that would have been published. But anyway, maybe so. It serves a little bit of a purpose, as far as, because thematic elements throughout Ghost in the Shell allude to this, because you'll get into the subject of pretty much slave dolls or sex toys,
Yeah, yeah,
and there's an issue in here, a select storyline wherein um the abuse of people to make these slave dolls
yeah,
is broached, and it's basically like child trafficking.
yeah,
They kind of there's a connection made between, well, the story basically goes into children are trafficked through like poorer countries, and then their ghosts are dubbed into these sex dolls, right?
yeah,
So there is the undercurrent of uh what it for me, it's kind of like he's trying to say, like, well, all aspects of humanity are affected by this type of technology. And even
yeah,
even in that scene wherein um the major is basically on vacation, and Bateau is forced to kind of seek her out so she can go back to duty.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't know it, but he's interrupting her vacation. Um, and whatever she does in her privacy, he kind of gets a taste of.
Yeah.
And he gets his comeuppance a little bit later in that segment. But you also see that when he does call her, that her section 9 has already kind of said, like, no vacation for you. There is no, you don't have access to these experiences anymore, and the drug is locked out.
Yeah.
So it's a form of, hey, if you are in a certain, it's a form of control, is basically what I saw. It's like, okay, wait,
Yeah.
is it then going to be that society can be called back at a whim, even through their recreational activities?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It does pose a lot of. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's prescient even now when work intrudes into our personal lives all the time.
Yeah.
So,
that is true.
And like
yeah.
I said, like I said, Shiro is also an erotic manga artist. So he's also kind of showcasing his skill in that area.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, for me, I originally read it without that scene in it, and it didn't affect my reading of it. When I saw it here, I was just like, whoa. I'm just like, I don't remember that.
Yeah. And to be fair, it's actually the only scene. Like, people harp on about it, saying that, oh my gosh, it's such a travesty it was cut, and everything. But to be honest, it's just one scene in the entire book, and there's nothing else that is anywhere near that explicit.
And it serves its purpose in the general story. It didn't have to be that long or that explicit.
Yeah.
But when you have something this lengthy, and it's not, everything else is it's just a cherry on top, I bet.
Yeah, and I think I can respect the fact that what you said about Shiro showcasing the other side of his sort of artistic interests, in this case, sort of hentai and sort of erotic art, is totally fine. It's his story at the end of the day. It's his work, and
it's his culture, because this is originally released in Japanese culture, where you have, I mean, these things, you want, I don't want to say like there's a different attitude towards sexuality in Japan.
Yeah.
So us in the West, who are a little bit more prudish, will kind of either be squeamish or kind of like have a giggle. But when you have that, you kind of say, like, well, that's just part of society. And there are many different societies that say sexuality is a healthy part of my sexuality. Why shouldn't I be able to talk about it?
Yeah, you're 100% right there. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting though. So yeah, overall, then I think the story for me has some really, really great elements to it, just like the movie did. And I think I was more in love with the world building in the book than I was as much for the characterization, because I think, and this applies to both versions, by the way, the original manga and the 1995 movie, that I don't feel that, although Major Kusanagi and Bato are the main protagonists, but they have a whole team, and then they've got the chief. They're very functional characters. They work and they drive the story forwards. However, they're not the most developed, in my opinion, in this book. But that said, I think they're used as sort of a hanger to support the rest of the story elements and the story beats, which I think work really well. It's a very interesting tale with some huge repercussions in terms of what would eventually would eventually materialize in modern day society. This is it's a seminal piece of work. There's no denying it. But what are your
Yeah.
sort of concluding thoughts on the writing?
Um, I would have to kind of say that um, Shiro Shiro's writing and artwork are seamlessly. You have to think of them as kind of seamless together. It's his way of thinking. It's his way of having fun. I think I draw myself, and a lot of my drawing style is based on what I saw. His work to me when I first read Appleseed, when I first collected that, when I first saw Ghost in the Shell, I was such a big fan. I based my own drawing style on his drawing style.
Yeah.
And when I draw robots and I draw anime, I draw it kind of like he does. And when I look at his drawing and his world building and his writing, it's just when you're a kid and you kind of go, "Hey, giant robots and manga, and
Oh yeah.
what would it be like if I could go inside one of those robots, and
Yeah.
how would it maneuver?"
Yeah.
Um, and even my anonymity, like here on the channel, is based on Shiro's philosophy, because Shiro basically is his pen name. That's not his real name. He's never really kind of shown himself,
Mm,
because he's basically said, if my company found out I was doing this, I would get into serious trouble.
yeah.
And you could tell, like, I kind of speculate, like, he's probably working for maybe something that has a real design influence. Like,
Hmm.
it's either he's an architect, or he works for a
Yeah.
car company, or he works for
Yeah.
industrial design or something like that, because all of his concepts, like, and you see it here when they talk about
Yeah.
especially the weapons. Like, you could tell he's a gun nut, for example. You could tell
100%.
he's a mecha nut, he's a car nut.
Yeah.
um and he's like, okay, you should, because the major's like, and this is all fictional stuff. He's like, "Hey, Togusa, I noticed you're wearing a revolver, but you're supposed to be covering me. I want you to like use I want you to use
Ye-
one of these Saburos, because
Yeah, yeah, and he
I'm the
mentioned,
one you're supposed to cover, you know?"
and he goes into like the actual sort of ammunition you should be using and things like that, and yeah, a lot of his otaku nature in so many areas comes out, and that segues quite neatly into the art style. You mentioned that you wonder whether he has a background in kind of architecture or industrial design, and you hit the nail
Mm,
on the head there, because the level of detail in his mechanical designs, the
mm-hmm.
architecture, the buildings, the sort of the scenario, the environments rather, so detailed, so well thought out. And you mentioned the bit
Exactly.
about him being a car nut. Don't you just love the interiors of all the vehicles that he draws? They look so comfortable. They look like the kind of car I would
Yeah.
love to sit in, and
It's
drive, because
the kind of car,
this
yeah, the kind of car in the 90s that you would love to sit in.
no, I mean, they've got so much padding, and they've got all of these really
Yeah,
cool kind of UI devices and stuff, and it's just he put a lot of thought into all of the designs and the weapons, and the Fuchikomas are a work of genius, really. I know he was
hmm,
something that I learned, and it's actually in the notes on the manga that he writes himself in the collector's editions, that he was really, really obsessed with spiders. I don't know why you would. There's something wrong with you if you are, to be fair, because I'm terrified of them. But he was obsessed with spiders, and it's just really interesting how he created this spider mech. And I think to be honest, it was probably the first spider mech I'd ever seen, um,
hmm,
ever, as
yeah.
as a kid, as a teenager when I first
Oh,
saw it. And
you've never seen that Tom Selleck movie? What was the name of that Tom Selleck movie with, like, the little mini acid spitting spiders? It was a science fiction film. I think,
no,
what was it? Runaway or something like that? We'll
I'm not
have to look
sure.
it up later. But
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
maybe the closest thing to I suppose, a spider mech, but it wasn't really a spider mech. Was Do you remember the old '80s movie Robot Jocks, the American kind
No,
of?
I don't. I never
Oh,
saw
you
that.
don't? Oh, that's a video for another day. But yeah, it was a really, really cheesy '80s kind of, uh, I suppose, mech film, if that was even a thing back then. But it had like a spider robot in it, like a massive one, a mech that somebody was piloting. And that was the first time I saw something like that, other than maybe the Power Rangers in the early '90s. So
Okay.
so yeah, yeah. So this was all his mechanical designs, all of the even the circuitry and stuff. Sometimes when he goes into that really granular detail of
Mm-hmm.
the the mechanisms of how the network functions in this world,
Mm-hmm.
it's mind blowing how much detail he puts into each of these panels, right?
Right, right. Well, I mean, he's obviously really done his homework and is really interested in everything that he designs and draws. And you could even see like it. There's an element of there's an element of fun that he puts into it. He's like, man, I wonder what that would look like. And then he would just draw it and probably say like, okay, well that's what it would look like. And if you're gonna do that in my world, this is how it would be. And so
Yeah.
and it's very much based on real world stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's great to be lost in the detail. Maybe that's
Yeah.
kind of my point. You're just like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I guess it's just like if you were J.K. Rowling and you were just kind of saying like, well, this is the way that witchcraft and wizardry actually works, and you get to go into the details, right? And
Yeah.
it's the same with this kind of technology, and you just kind of you want to be lost in that world. This is an escape. I mean, this is pure escapism. Uh, and it's great. You could see the Japanese sensibility and the way that they train you. If you're, I don't know what kind of schooling he did, but maybe he went through a technical college or a technical school and things like that, wherein he really just got a passion for machines and things like that.
Yeah.
And it reflects in how he writes and what he puts into his work.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that absolutely. I suppose in conclusion, from my perspective, the art and the writing really just really puts first and foremost that um, Masamune Shirow is an auteur when it comes to attention to detail. He's really planned out a very interesting story that is so layered. And I also love these color spreads as well. I mean, the color pages. There's quite a few of them actually, and they're so well colored. They're so in a way it kind of makes me feel like I wish the whole thing was in color, but um,
Well, you could see that if you got a color, this is basically the first when you put it into a manga in a serialized form, this is probably the first thing you will see, and
yeah,
you will it will be one of those things wherein, yeah, it's this is what will draw you into this serialized collection of different stories. Is this layout and these colors, you
yeah,
know? So,
yeah,
um, yeah, yeah,
definitely,
this is
yeah,
him showcasing, and Kodansha really
and
Kodansha really kind of hit it at the park when they published this.
yeah, and I have to say it is again it's a seminal piece of work. Has it stood the test of time? In my opinion, I would say that uh, other series have taken these concepts and they have in many ways, including sort of Western stories as well. But I think maybe ironically for me, what I was expecting more of, and maybe what that I thought was a little bit absent here, was the soul of the story. The mechanics are there, the cold details are there, but I perhaps wanted a bit more characterization. I wanted to get to know these characters more, rather than the world taking center stage. But that's completely subjective. That's just me feeling that. So, I mean, overall, I heartily recommend anybody to pick up Ghost in the Shell. It is, I mean, if you call yourself somebody who's into manga or anime, like Akira, it's one of those homework pieces. It's like this is where it all started for a lot of sort of for the industry in terms of really putting anime, putting manga into the sort of the public eye. So so what about your closing thoughts, Jake?
Um, this I didn't even I forgot to even mention, but this is really a great piece of work that showcases Shiro's unique attention to detail and his unique way of storytelling. Um, this is he. This I didn't mention before, but notice that the main character is a woman, and
Mm,
that's actually quite different. You know, like
yeah.
he was one of the first prominent creators that showcased women as the main character, and this is not the first time that he's done it. Like his the Appleseed, which was before this,
And Dominion
uh,
Tank Police as well.
and Dominion Tank Police, yeah,
Yeah.
they were they mostly have women as their protagonists. Um, so it's one of those things where he was probably also influenced by his exposure to girls manga. You know,
Yeah.
um,
True.
so that being said, I think he he is a bit of a pioneer and a trailblazer in this. Um, I don't know of any other work or franchise or IPO that has this much attention to detail to its characters and mechanics. Um, you know, you could say like Akira probably. They probably influenced each other, or maybe even Mobile Suit Gundam was an
Mm,
influence. But when you kind of look at Shiro Masamune, it's a unique blend of all of those in a really,
yeah.
really enjoyable world. So yeah, highly recommended, and hopefully we'll get to some of his other work at another point.
Awesome. All right. So thanks everybody for joining us for this long overdue review of Ghost in the Shell. We'll be back with more content soon. So until then, this is me signing off. And thanks for watching. Take care,
Yeah,
everyone.
and put something in the comments as far as what you thought or what you think of Ghost in the Shell in general.
See you, everyone.
Bye.